The quiet of deep space was broken by a sudden blip on the patrol ship's sensors, a signal that seemed almost frantic in its irregular pattern. It came from a planet far beyond the usual travel routes, a world most civilizations avoided because of its reputation for danger. The signal was unlike anything the crew had seen before, erratic, coded in a strange sequence that didn't match any standard galactic communication protocol. It carried the unmistakable urgency of someone in extreme distress, someone desperate enough to risk reaching out across the void of space. For most species, responding to such a signal would be dangerous, even foolish. But for this crew, danger was their specialty. They were Deathworlders renowned across galaxies for surviving conditions and environments that would kill most other species instantly. Harsh climates, extreme predators, toxic atmospheres, these were their playgrounds. The message immediately captured the attention of their captain, a figure known for both caution and curiosity. He understood that responding could bring unimaginable danger, yet ignoring it went against everything their kind believed in. They were warriors, yes, but they were also explorers and problem solvers, and the call for help was something they could not ignore. The ship adjusted its course, navigating through asteroid belts and radiation storms, heading toward the source of the signal. The crew, trained for survival in the harshest conditions, prepared themselves mentally and physically for what awaited. Even for them, the unknown was always the most dangerous element. As they approached the planet, their scanners began to pick up strange readings. Life forms moved in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, yet alien. And the energy readings suggested more than just natural phenomena. It was a world alive with danger in every sense, not just physically but environmentally. The crew could sense it, a tense awareness that something was waiting for them. The captain stood at the command deck, his eyes fixed on the glowing orb that was their destination. The signal grew stronger, almost pleading now, sending chills even through seasoned Deathworlders who had faced countless deadly missions before. Something about it hinted at desperation and fear, emotions that resonated even across species lines. They were not walking into just another rescue mission. They were stepping into a world where survival itself was the ultimate test. As the ship entered the planet's orbit, the view from the observation deck was both beautiful and terrifying. Towering mountain ranges cut through the atmosphere, shrouded in swirling mists of toxic gases that glowed faintly under the light of a distant sun. Rivers of molten rock cut across the surface like veins of fire, and the forests below moved strangely, as if the plants themselves were aware of their intruders. The planet was alive in a way that made even the Deathworlders pause. They had trained to expect death and destruction, but this world seemed to challenge even their hardened instincts. Sensors detected life moving beneath a canopy, creatures that defied description. Some appeared to be predators, others prey, but all seemed perfectly adapted to an ecosystem that would be instantly lethal to outsiders. The SOS signal, they realized, was not just a call for help. It was a warning, a beacon sent out by someone who had survived against impossible odds and now sought aid from the only species bold enough to answer. There was something urgent about it, and even the most skeptical crew members could sense that failure to respond could have catastrophic consequences, not just for the signal sender but possibly for themselves as well. The captain ordered the ship to descend, and the crew went through the familiar motions of preparing for planetary entry. Yet, unlike other missions, there was a tension in the air that could not be ignored. Every system was double-checked, weapons were primed, and the defensive shields were reinforced. They had survived worlds with poisonous atmospheres, carnivorous plants, and extreme weather phenomena. But this planet seemed almost conscious, as if it could sense their approach. The SOS signal pulsed insistently, guiding them to a landing zone that was difficult to navigate. Jagged cliffs, dense forests, and rivers of corrosive liquids made the descent a perilous maneuver. The ship shuddered as it cut through turbulent winds, sensors alerting the crew to unstable currents and electrical storms forming in real time. The Deathworlders worked in perfect coordination, their movements precise and practiced, yet even they could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down. Every instinct screamed that this was not a simple rescue mission. It was a test, one that would challenge their skill, courage, and survival instincts to the fullest. Finally, the ship touched down on a plateau that seemed safer than the surrounding terrain, though still far from ideal. The planet's surface was uneven and covered in strange crystalline formations that emitted a faint, eerie glow. The air was dense with chemicals that would be instantly toxic to most lifeforms, but for Deathworlders it was tolerable, if uncomfortable. The SOS signal continued, stronger now, guiding them toward what appeared to be a settlement, though settlement was almost too gentle a word. Structures of alien design, made from materials that seemed alive, rose from the ground like coral reefs under a sea of fire. The signal emanated from one of these buildings, pulsing with urgency that could be felt even without technology. The crew suited up, weapons ready, hearts pounding with anticipation. They were stepping into a world that was both hostile and mysterious, where every step could trigger danger, yet also hold the possibility of uncovering something extraordinary. As they approached the source, the first signs of life appeared, alien figures emerging from the structures, moving quickly but cautiously. They were unlike anything the Deathworlders had encountered before, fragile in appearance yet strangely resilient, moving with agility that belied their thin forms. The aliens' eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, reflecting both fear and hope. The crew realized immediately that these beings had been through a struggle, something beyond ordinary conflict. The SOS had been sent not just as a plea for aid, but as a desperate attempt to survive against overwhelming odds. Communication attempts began, but language barriers complicated matters. The alien speech was a series of tones and vibrations, difficult to interpret, yet the urgency was unmistakable. The captain gestured for patience, understanding that missteps could lead to disaster. Even seasoned warriors knew that survival in an alien environment required observation and caution, not just brute force. Every step they took had to be calculated, every decision measured against the unknown dangers that awaited. The crew quickly realized that the planet itself was as much an enemy as any predator. Toxic gases, unstable terrain, and strange, aggressive wildlife presented challenges at every turn. Scanners picked up creatures moving in packs, coordinated and intelligent, capable of ambushing and striking with deadly precision. The Deathworlders, though trained for lethal environments, found themselves in a situation that demanded more than just skill with weapons or survival instincts. Strategy, observation, and adaptability were crucial. The SOS signal, while still pulsing, seemed almost alive, a beacon that demanded not just a response, but understanding. The crew's tension grew as they sensed that this was only the beginning. Whatever had sent the signal had already survived unimaginable threats, and now, the Deathworlders were about to enter a world where chaos could erupt at any moment, testing their limits like never before. They were no longer just responding to a call for help. They were stepping into a living trial of survival, one where every decision could mean life or death, and where even the strongest warriors could be caught off guard by the deadly unpredictability of the planet. The Deathworlders' ship slowly descended through the turbulent atmosphere, buffeted by violent storms that seemed almost alive. Lightning arced across the dark clouds, illuminating jagged mountain peaks and glowing rivers of molten rock far below. The crew felt the tension in the air, each member acutely aware that this world was nothing like the planets they had visited before. It was alive with danger, every inch of it a potential threat, yet also filled with strange beauty that drew them in despite the risk. The SOS signal continued to pulse, now steady and insistent, guiding them toward the source. From the observation deck, the crew could see the alien landscape sprawling below, forests that shimmered in strange colors, mountains that twisted unnaturally into the sky, and rivers that seemed to move with a strange rhythm, as if the planet itself had a heartbeat. This was not a place designed for ordinary life, yet life thrived here, adapted in ways that were both impressive and terrifying. The landing was difficult. Violent winds threatened to throw the ship off course, while shifting electromagnetic fields interfered with navigation systems. The captain's hands moved with precision, steering the ship through the chaos as the crew braced for impact. Finally, with a shudder that echoed through the hull, the ship touched down on a plateau that jutted out from the forested terrain. The plateau was uneven, covered in strange crystalline formations that emitted a soft glow, illuminating the surrounding area with an eerie light. The Deathworlders quickly activated their external sensors, scanning the area for life and potential threats. The readings were unsettling, movement everywhere, yet nothing fully visible. Shadows flitted between the glowing crystals, and strange noises echoed through the air, some from the wildlife, some from the planet itself. The crew realized immediately that this world did not follow the rules they were used to. It was chaotic, unpredictable, and extremely dangerous. As the Deathworlders prepared to exit the ship, the SOS signal grew louder, almost as if it were alive. The alien civilization was close, yet not immediately visible. The crew's first glimpse of the inhabitants was startling. The aliens emerged cautiously from the strange coral-like structures dotting the plateau. Their forms were delicate, almost fragile-looking, yet there was an unmistakable strength in their movements. Their skin shimmered with colors that shifted depending on the angle of the light, making them appear almost transparent. Their eyes glowed faintly, reflecting both fear and hope as they watched the death. Communication was difficult. Their language consisted of tones and vibrations, which the ship's translators struggled to interpret. Still, the urgency of the SOS was clear. These beings were in desperate need of help, yet they were wary, unsure whether the Deathworlders could be trusted. The tension between the two groups was palpable, the air thick with fear, anticipation, and the possibility of violence. The captain signaled for caution. He knew that even the Deathworlders, for all their strength and skill, could easily be overwhelmed if they acted recklessly. The first step was observation, learning the layout of the alien structures and the nature of the surrounding environment. The plateau was treacherous. Crystalline outcroppings were sharp enough to pierce armor, and the terrain was riddled with hidden crevices and unstable ground. Beneath the surface, the planet itself seemed to be alive with energy, pulsing in ways that affected electronic equipment and even disrupted some of the crew's sensory perception. Wildlife movements were unpredictable. Some creatures moved like shadows, Others were visible only for a moment before disappearing into the forest. The Deathworlders quickly realized that brute strength would not be enough to navigate this world safely. Observation, strategy, and caution were essential. Every decision mattered, and one wrong step could trigger a chain reaction of danger that might not be recoverable. As the crew approached the alien structures, it became clear that these beings had been struggling to survive for some time. The buildings, though strange in design, were showing signs of damage, possibly from attacks by predators or environmental hazards. The aliens themselves moved with a mix of fear and urgency, gesturing toward the surroundings in a way that suggested they had been fighting to protect their homes. Some of the Deathworlders approached cautiously, weapons lowered but ready, attempting to establish communication through gestures and translated words. The aliens responded slowly at first, watching every movement. Trust could not be forced. It had to be earned. Over time, the crew began to piece together fragments of the aliens' situation. The SOS, they learned, was genuine, a call for help against predators that had overwhelmed the planet's defenses and a hostile environment that left the inhabitants struggling to survive. However, the crew also realized that the SOS might not tell the full story. The planet itself, with its violent storms, unstable terrain, and aggressive wildlife, presented dangers that could not be ignored. Every step forward was a test of skill and awareness. The Deathworlders split into small teams, each moving in carefully coordinated patterns, scanning for threats and attempting to map the area. Their training in extreme environments allowed them to adapt quickly, but the planet continually challenged them, introducing unexpected hazards and forcing them to rethink strategies on the fly. Predatory creatures appeared at unpredictable moments, some attacking directly, others attempting to isolate and trap the warriors. The aliens, despite their fragile appearance, showed knowledge of the terrain and helped guide the crew, teaching them shortcuts and warning them of dangers that sensors alone could not detect. The interaction between the Deathworlders and the aliens was complicated. While the aliens were desperate for help, they were also suspicious. Their civilization had survived by adapting to the planet's dangers, and the arrival of an unknown species, even one as capable as the Deathworlders, was met with both hope and caution. Miscommunication was frequent. Gestures could be misunderstood, warnings misinterpreted. Tension ran high as the two groups attempted to coordinate efforts to protect the settlement and prepare for possible attacks. The Deathworlders were experienced warriors, but they were used to environments where threats were clear and direct. Here, the dangers were unpredictable and multi-layered. Storms could appear without warning, predators adapted quickly, and the very landscape seemed to conspire against them. The SOS, once a simple beacon of distress, now represented a complex situation that demanded intelligence, adaptability, and restraint. Despite these challenges, small victories began to emerge. The Deathworlders' presence provided a deterrent against some predators, their advanced weaponry and physical prowess offering protection that the aliens had not known before. The aliens, in turn, demonstrated surprising ingenuity, using environmental knowledge and small technological devices to create traps and alerts. The partnership, though tentative, began to show promise. Mutual respect started to develop as both sides realized that survival required cooperation. The Deathworlders learned that the aliens' fragility was deceptive. Their ability to survive and adapt in the harshest conditions was remarkable. The SOS had not only brought them to this dangerous world, but also into an alliance that could change the course of the conflict if they could survive long enough to see it through. As the first day of contact drew to a close, the crew took stock of the situation. The SOS had led them to a planet that challenged their every skill and instinct. The aliens, though desperate, had begun to trust them cautiously. The dangers were real and constant. From the unpredictable predators to the violent and unstable environment, every moment of inaction could be deadly, yet rash decisions were equally dangerous. The Deathworlders understood that this was only the beginning. The SOS had brought them here, but surviving, protecting the aliens, and navigating the chaos that awaited would require everything they had: strength, intelligence, courage, and an unbreakable will to endure. As night fell over the glowing plateau, the crew prepared for what they knew would be a long, grueling journey. The signal continued to pulse, a reminder that the aliens' plea for help was ongoing, that danger was everywhere, and that the Deathworlders had stepped into a world where chaos ruled and survival was never guaranteed. The calm that had briefly settled over the plateau was shattered almost immediately. The Deathworlders, who had thought they had begun to understand the alien planet, quickly realized that the environment was far more unpredictable than they could have imagined. The predators, which at first seemed sporadic and random in their movements, had begun to adapt. They appeared to anticipate the Deathworlders' tactics, changing hunting patterns in ways that suggested intelligence and strategy rather than mere instinct. Ambushes became more frequent, and the terrain itself seemed to work against the warriors. The crystalline formations that had appeared harmless during the day now reflected light in ways that obscured vision, creating shadows where predators could hide. The air, already toxic to most species, shifted in composition during sudden gusts, forcing the crew to constantly adjust their breathing and protective suits. Every moment became a test of alertness and reflexes, and even the most experienced among them felt the pressure mounting. The aliens were equally affected by the chaos. Their desperation had increased, and the strain of survival was visible in every movement and gesture. Families huddled together in hidden alcoves, while scouts risked their lives to warn of approaching predators. The Deathworlders, though used to such dangers, could see the emotional toll it took on these beings. Communication became urgent, as both sides struggled to coordinate defense and survival strategies. The SOS signal, once a simple plea for help, had now evolved into a lifeline guiding every action, every decision, and every movement. It was a constant reminder that failure was not an option, and that even small mistakes could cost lives. Natural disasters began to compound the threats. The planet's violent storms intensified, lightning striking randomly, splitting trees and setting parts of the forest ablaze. The ground shook periodically as tremors rippled across the plateau, creating fissures that threatened to swallow anyone standing too close. Rivers of molten rock shifted unpredictably, forcing the Deathworlders and the aliens to constantly adjust positions. The predators exploited these hazards, using the chaos to their advantage, striking quickly and retreating before they could be countered. The Deathworlders realized that brute force alone was no longer sufficient. Their usual methods of overpowering threats were being outmatched by a combination of environmental danger and predator intelligence. Internal tension within the Deathworlder crew also began to rise. Despite their training, some began questioning the decisions of the captain and the effectiveness of their strategies. Fear and pride clashed, and small disagreements turned into heated debates over the best way to protect the aliens and themselves. Some crew members advocated for a full offensive approach, attacking all predators aggressively, while others argued for a cautious strategy, using traps and environmental advantages to minimize risk. The captain had to balance these conflicting perspectives while maintaining authority. Knowing that a split in the team could be disastrous, leadership became as critical as physical strength, and every decision carried weighty consequences. Meanwhile, the aliens began to reveal more of their technology and survival techniques, though their devices were rudimentary compared to Deathworlder weaponry. They had clever applications that could manipulate the environment and create temporary defenses. The Deathworlders studied these devices, learning to use them in tandem with their own tactics. Small successes emerged, such as luring predators into traps or diverting them with noise and light signals. Each victory, though minor, brought relief and renewed energy, showing that collaboration between species could produce results even in the most chaotic of circumstances. Trust grew slowly, built on shared danger and the necessity of cooperation. As the chaos continued, the Deathworlders began to understand the true nature of the predators. They were not mindless beasts, but adaptive creatures, capable of learning from each encounter. Attacks that worked once were ineffective the next time. They could coordinate ambushes and exploit weaknesses in the terrain, demonstrating a level of cunning that demanded constant vigilance. The warriors had to adapt as well, changing strategies on the fly, anticipating moves, and remaining one step ahead despite the relentless pressure. Survival was no longer about physical power alone. It required strategy, patience, and the ability to read patterns in the chaos. Amid the danger, moments of humanity and connection emerged. Some of the Deathworlders began forming bonds with individual aliens, learning their behaviors and establishing silent communication methods to coordinate movements in real time. These small alliances allowed them to navigate the most treacherous parts of the terrain, avoiding both environmental hazards and predator attacks. Families of aliens who had once hidden in fear now began to trust the warriors enough to participate in basic defense, setting up warning systems and helping guide the teams through dangerous areas. The SOS, which had initially seemed like a lifeless signal, had now become a symbol of survival, connection, and shared determination between two very different species. The scale of the chaos became even more apparent when multiple predator groups began to converge on the plateau simultaneously. The Deathworlders were forced to split their forces to cover multiple threats, each team relying on instincts, communication, and coordination with the aliens to survive. The environment added to the challenge, with shifting ground, toxic air pockets, and electrical storms threatening to overwhelm even the best-laid plans. Yet, through teamwork and adaptability, the Deathworlders managed to hold their ground. Every victory came at a cost, as some injuries occurred and the physical and mental strain on the crew increased. The SOS had brought them here, but staying alive and maintaining order in the chaos required every ounce of their skill, endurance, and courage. The Redditors themselves began to show signs of a larger pattern, almost as if they were part of a coordinated plan or hierarchy. The Deathworlders noticed that certain groups would retreat strategically when threatened, only to regroup and attack from a different angle, suggesting intelligence beyond instinct. Understanding this required patience and observation, and the crew worked tirelessly, mapping movements and adjusting their tactics accordingly. Meanwhile, the aliens shared their own observations, providing insights into predator behaviors that were invisible to sensors. This growing collaboration became essential to maintaining any semblance of control over the chaos. allowing the Deathworlders to anticipate attacks rather than merely react to them. The Deathworlders had learned several critical lessons. They understood that this world required more than brute strength or advanced technology. It demanded patience, strategy, observation, and cooperation with a species that was unfamiliar and initially mistrusted. The SOS had served its purpose, drawing them into a situation that was as much about adaptation and understanding as it was about rescue. The predators, the environment, and the constant threat of disaster had forced the warriors to evolve their approach. They could no longer rely solely on instinct. They had to combine intelligence, skill, and trust in the aliens to survive. Through all this, the SOS signal continued to pulse steadily, almost like a heartbeat, reminding everyone that survival was not guaranteed and that chaos could erupt at any moment. It was a constant motivator, a call to action, and a symbol of the fragile line between life and death on this world. The Deathworlders had responded to the call, but they now realized that responding was only the beginning. To survive and protect the aliens, they had to embrace the chaos, adapt to it, and work in harmony with a species they barely understood. The challenges were immense, but so were the opportunities for triumph, connection, and discovery in a world where danger was the only certainty. After days of relentless chaos, the Deathworlders began to realize that direct confrontation was not enough. The predators were smart, the environment was unpredictable, and the planet itself seemed determined to challenge every move they made. They had survived dangerous worlds before, but nothing had prepared them for this level of unpredictability. Every attack, every trap, every strategy seemed to be anticipated by the predators, leaving them scrambling to adjust in real time. It became clear that brute force alone could not secure victory or ensure survival. The captain gathered the crew and explained that they needed to change their approach. They could no longer simply fight. They had to observe, learn, and adapt. The shift in strategy began slowly. Small teams moved cautiously through the forests and crystalline plains, taking notes on predator behavior, environmental hazards, and the aliens' survival techniques. The Deathworlders watched how predators moved in packs, how they avoided certain traps, and how they exploited weaknesses in the terrain. They observed the aliens, noting how they used rudimentary technology to create temporary shelters, warning systems, and even diversions to protect themselves. Combining these insights with their own experience, the Deathworlders began to design new strategies. They realized that survival required cooperation, patience, and a deep understanding of both the planet and its creatures. Every move was carefully calculated, and every small success built confidence. The alliance between the Deathworlders and the aliens grew stronger. At first, the aliens had been fearful, hiding from the predators and unsure of the Deathworlders' intentions. But as they saw the warriors adapting and using strategy rather than raw power, their trust began to grow. They shared knowledge of the terrain, the habits of the predators, and even their own hidden technologies. Using this combined knowledge, the groups began to set traps that utilized the environment itself. They redirected rivers, collapsed unstable cliffs onto predator paths, and used light reflections from the crystalline formations to confuse and disorient attackers. Each trap required precise timing and coordination, and even minor mistakes could have disastrous consequences. Yet the collaboration began to show results. Small victories became more frequent, and for the first time in days, the plateau seemed to hold a sense of hope amidst the chaos. As the Deathworlders continued to adapt, they discovered new facets of the predators' intelligence. The creatures were not merely reacting, they were learning. Some predators observed and adjusted to the traps, avoiding them entirely or leading other predators away to lure the warriors into danger. The Deathworlders had to stay one step ahead, constantly modifying their tactics and using the aliens' insights to anticipate behavior. Observation became as important as action, and patience was critical. The crew began to rotate tasks, assigning scouts, strategists, and trap specialists to monitor the predators while others maintained defenses. The planet's unpredictable weather and shifting terrain added another layer of complexity, forcing everyone to stay alert at all times. Even when a trap succeeded, they knew it was temporary. The predators adapted quickly, meaning the next challenge could be far more dangerous despite the constant pressure. The Deathworlders and aliens began to form bonds. Shared danger and mutual dependence created trust and even camaraderie. Crew members learned the aliens' subtle gestures and signals, while the aliens observed the Deathworlders' discipline, courage, and adaptability. These relationships became vital, allowing teams to move with silent coordination, warning each other of dangers, setting traps, and guiding one another through hazards. Some Deathworlders even risked venturing into areas considered too dangerous to retrieve alien survivors or supplies, showing a level of selflessness that deepened trust. The SOS signal, which had initially drawn them to the planet, now symbolized not only survival but also partnership and cooperation between species. The turning point came when the Deathworlders realized that the planet itself could be used as a weapon against the predators. They began to study patterns in the storms, the movement of molten rivers, and the behavior of toxic gas pockets. Using careful planning, they created scenarios where predators would be led into natural hazards, One team lured a pack into a narrow canyon, triggering a controlled collapse of unstable rock that trapped many of the attackers. Another team guided predators into a toxic fog bank, using protective suits to navigate safely while the creatures succumbed to the environment. The planet, once an enemy, became a tool in their strategy. The predators were formidable, but the Deathworlders and aliens had begun to understand that survival depended on thinking like the planet itself, seeing every danger as both a threat and an opportunity. As the chaos began to shift in their favor, morale improved, injuries were treated quickly, and teams learned from every encounter. The Deathworlders' previous reliance on brute strength was now balanced with observation, strategy, and adaptability. The aliens, previously fragile and fearful, became active participants in defense and survival, their knowledge complementing the warriors' experience. Every small victory reinforced trust and demonstrated that the SOS had brought the right species together for this challenge. Success was no longer measured by defeating every predator outright, but by surviving, learning, and gradually turning the tide. Amidst the danger, personal stories emerged. Some crew members had saved alien children trapped by predators, forming quiet bonds that transcended species. Others had learned subtle alien survival techniques, discovering that ingenuity often outweighed raw power. These small victories, often overlooked in the larger chaos, built morale and reminded the Deathworlders why they had come. They were not merely fighting for themselves, but for an entire civilization struggling to survive on a hostile world. The SOS, in this context, had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that even amidst overwhelming danger, cooperation and strategy could prevail. The Deathworlders had managed to stabilize key areas of the plateau. Predators were fewer in number, traps were more effective, and the alien settlements were better protected. The planet was still dangerous, and chaos could erupt at any moment, but control had shifted. The Deathworlders had learned to anticipate threats, adapt strategies on the fly, and work in unison with the aliens. The SOS, which had started as a simple distress call, had transformed into a rallying point, a symbol of resilience, adaptation, and the strength of cooperation across species. It had forced the Deathworlders to evolve, not just as warriors but as problem solvers, capable of navigating the most chaotic and lethal environments. Even as they began to see results, the Deathworlders remained aware that the challenge was far from over. The predators were still out there learning and adapting, and the environment could shift without warning. Every victory was temporary, every trap had its limits, and the smallest mistake could undo days of careful planning. Yet the crew faced these challenges with renewed confidence, armed not only with weapons and skill but also with knowledge, observation, and the trust of the alien survivors. The SOS had brought them here, but it had also forced them to rise above chaos, turning what had seemed like impossible danger into a carefully navigable battlefield. This phase ended not with the elimination of all threats but with a new understanding. The Deathworlders had learned that survival on this planet required intelligence, patience, and partnership. Brute force alone would fail, but careful observation, adaptability, and cooperation could turn even the most chaotic environment into an advantage. The SOS had achieved its purpose. It had not only called for help but had tested the warriors, forced them to adapt, and brought together two very different species to face danger as one. The plateau, once a symbol of threat and disorder, was now a controlled zone, a testament to the power of strategy and teamwork in the face of overwhelming chaos. After weeks of constant struggle, the plateau finally fell into a fragile state of calm. The predators were no longer as bold or aggressive. The Deathworlders' combined strategies with the aliens had weakened their numbers and disrupted their patterns. The planet, still wild and unpredictable, seemed almost respectful of the order that had been established. The alien settlements, once vulnerable and scattered, were now fortified with makeshift defenses and carefully monitored escape routes. Every member of the Deathworlder crew felt a sense of accomplishment, tempered by exhaustion and the knowledge that danger could erupt at any moment. The SOS signal, which had guided them to this chaotic world, now pulsed weakly, almost as if it, too, had survived the ordeal. The mission that had begun as a simple response to a call for help had transformed into a profound test of skill, patience, and survival. The Deathworlders began to prepare for departure, but a strange feeling settled over the crew. They had helped the aliens survive, protected their homes, and pushed back the predators. Yet there was a sense that something had not been fully revealed. The aliens, now calmer and more organized, gathered to watch the warriors. Their expressions were a mix of relief, gratitude, and a subtle caution, as if they still feared that more danger might arise. The Deathworlders, hardened by countless battles, sensed the same underlying tension. They had learned to trust instinct and observation, but the planet had always retained an air of unpredictability. As the crew inspected their ship and prepared systems for takeoff, it became increasingly clear that the SOS had been more than a simple distress call. The revelation came gradually. Sensors detected traces of unusual energy signatures across the plateau, patterns that did not correspond to natural phenomena or predator activity. The captain pieced together the evidence. The SOS had been a deliberate test, designed to attract the galaxy's deadliest fighters. The predators, the chaotic environment, and even the planet's extreme conditions were orchestrated to challenge the Deathworlders' skills and adaptability. The aliens, though real and in need, had been used as part of a larger plan by an enigmatic intelligence studying survival, strategy, and resilience. At first, the crew felt a surge of anger and betrayal. They had risked their lives, endured injuries, and faced unimaginable danger, all for what had partially been a trap. But this feeling was soon tempered by a grudging respect for the intelligence behind the test. It was clever, far beyond the understanding of most species, and it had pushed the Deathworlders to their limits. Despite the revelation, there was no time for prolonged reflection. The predators were still present, though weakened, and the planet remained volatile. The Deathworlders prioritized ensuring that the aliens could sustain themselves in the absence of constant protection. They reinforced critical defenses, trained small groups of aliens in survival techniques, and shared knowledge of the terrain. While the SOS had been a test, the lives of the aliens were real, and the warriors took this responsibility seriously. The bonds that had formed over weeks of shared danger became evident. Aliens who had once fled in fear now moved confidently, alongside the Death, following their guidance and implementing strategies they had learned. The SOS had led to a partnership that was both practical and deeply meaningful as preparations for departure continued. The Deathworlders reflected on the lessons they had learned. That chaos had forced them to rethink what it meant to be warriors. Strength and advanced technology were invaluable, but they were insufficient on their own. Observation, patience, adaptability, and cooperation had proven equally essential. They had learned to work with a species entirely different from their own, respecting their strengths and compensating for weaknesses. Every trap, every strategy, every successful defense had required more than skill. It had required trust. The SOS had been a catalyst, drawing them into a situation that demanded not only physical endurance but emotional intelligence, problem-solving, and resilience. The aliens, now safe and organized, gathered to bid farewell. Their gestures of gratitude were subtle yet heartfelt, reflecting the profound bond that had developed during the mission. The Deathworlders had protected lives, stabilized settlements, and ensured that survival was possible even in a world that seemed designed to kill. Yet, even as they departed, there was a sense of unease. The SOS had drawn them into a test, a challenge orchestrated by forces beyond their understanding. The universe was larger and more unpredictable than they had imagined, and survival would always depend on the ability to adapt, learn, and trust. The Deathworlders' confidence was tempered by humility. They had triumphed, but the knowledge that the galaxy held even greater challenges weighed heavily on their minds. As the ship lifted from the plateau, the landscape below looked both familiar and strange. The molten rivers continued to flow, the forests swayed in the toxic winds, and the predators retreated into shadows, watching silently. The Deathworlders could feel the pulse of the planet, its chaotic energy both threatening and alive, yet now shaped, even temporarily, by their actions. The SOS, which had once seemed like a desperate plea, now represented a completed journey, a series of tests that had challenged every aspect of their being. Strength, intelligence, strategy, cooperation, and courage had all been tested, and the warriors had emerged stronger and wiser. During the journey home, conversations among the crew reflected on the experience. They shared personal stories of courage and survival, recounting moments when quick thinking had prevented disaster or when small acts of trust had saved lives. The SOS, they agreed, had been more than a distress call. It had been a mirror, reflecting their abilities, weaknesses, and capacity to grow under pressure. The alien allies, now organized and capable of defending themselves, represented the tangible results of their efforts. Survival had been the immediate goal, but lasting impact and mutual understanding were the unexpected rewards. By the time the homeworld came into view, the Deathworlders had transformed in ways subtle yet profound. The SOS mission had tested their limits, exposed vulnerabilities, and demanded ingenuity. They had faced overwhelming chaos and learned to thrive within it, not through brute force alone but through observation, adaptation, and collaboration. Each member of the crew carried memories of the alien planet, the predators, and the SOS, a reminder that the galaxy was full of unexpected challenges that could never be faced alone. The mission had been a crucible, shaping them into warriors not only of strength but of wisdom and resilience. Even after returning home, the lessons lingered. The Deathworlders shared their experiences with their world, teaching others the value of strategy, cooperation, and trust. The SOS signal itself became legendary, not just as a call for help, but as a catalyst that revealed the limits of survival, the importance of adaptability, and the extraordinary potential of collaboration across species. The aliens, meanwhile, continued to thrive on their planet, applying the skills and knowledge they had gained. The chaos that had once threatened their existence had been transformed into a lesson in resilience and partnership. Ultimately, the SOS had achieved far more than anyone initially imagined. It had tested the deadliest species in the galaxy, forced them to evolve, and created bonds between two very different civilizations. The Deathworlders returned as heroes, but they carried with them a quiet understanding. Survival is never guaranteed. Chaos is always present, and intelligence, patience, and cooperation can be as powerful as any weapon. The SOS, a signal that had begun as a plea for help, that had become a story of triumph, adaptation, and mutual respect, a story that would be told across galaxies as a testament to the enduring power of resilience in the face of overwhelming danger.